London, 1846. The morning air carried a distinct chill as Percy Thornfield, the 7th Duke of Westmoreland, stared at the letter in his hand with growing desperation. The bank's final warning glared back at him, the ink still fresh, the message unmistakable. 3 generations of ducal extravagance had culminated in this moment. He had 6 weeks to pay an impossible sum or lose everything his family had built over centuries. Impossible, he muttered, tossing the letter onto his mahogany desk. The study, once his father's sanctuary, now felt like a prison of guilt and obligation. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, straightening his posture to maintain the appearance of a man in control. His solicitor, Mr. Edwin Harrington, entered with a grave expression that only deepened Percy's dread. "Your Grace, I've reviewed the accounts again. I'm afraid there's no mistake." "There must be something else we can try," Percy insisted. "Properties in Scotland, perhaps?" "Entailed, Your Grace. As are the Yorkshire estates. You've already liquidated everything available to you." Harrington hesitated. "There is, however, one possible solution." "I'm listening." "Lord Ashington's will. The American Railway investment." Percy's jaw tightened. "My godfather's bequest." "I'm aware of the terms, Harrington." £500,000, Your Grace. More than enough to satisfy your creditors and restore Westmoreland to solvency. With the inconvenient stipulation that I must be married by my 30th birthday. Percy rose from his chair and moved to the window. Below, London continued its morning bustle, unaware of his predicament. Which, need I remind you, is in precisely 34 days. "Yes, Your Grace. Hence my urgency." Harrington cleared his throat. Lord Ashington was most explicit. "You must be married, not merely engaged, by midnight on June the 15th. Otherwise, the entire sum passes to his charitable foundation." Percy pressed his forehead against the cool glass. He always did have a wretched sense of humor. "Find me a bride, then. Someone suitable. Someone temporary." "Temporary, Your Grace?" "A marriage of convenience. 1 month to satisfy the will's conditions, after which we can arrange a quiet annulment." Percy turned back to face Harrington. "Find someone desperate enough to agree to such an arrangement, discreet enough to maintain the facade, and respectable enough that society won't question the match." Harrington's expression suggested this might be the most troublesome request the Duke had ever made. "I shall make inquiries, Your Grace. Though I must caution against, I'm not asking for caution, Harrington. I'm asking for salvation." After the solicitor departed, Percy poured himself a generous brandy despite the early hour. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to mock him, each second bringing him closer to financial ruin. The Academy for Young Ladies of distinguished lineage but diminished circumstances was precisely as dreary as its name suggested. Beatrice Aldington had spent 3 years within its grey walls, teaching deportment and French to girls whose families could no longer afford proper governesses but refused to admit their diminished status. "Miss Aldington, a moment of your time." Beatrice looked up from the stack of translations she was marking to find Mrs. Finch, the Academy's severe headmistress, standing in her classroom doorway. "Of course, Mrs. Finch." In the headmistress's office, Beatrice was surprised to find an elegantly dressed gentleman waiting. His silver hair and kind eyes contrasted with his businesslike demeanor. "This is Mr. Harrington," Mrs. Finch explained. "He has a proposition which may be of interest to you." Beatrice's spine stiffened. "I'm quite content with my position here. Miss Aldington," Mr. Harrington began, "I represent the Duke of Westmoreland. His Grace finds himself in need of a bride." A startled laugh escaped Beatrice before she could suppress it. "And he has sent you to an academy for impoverished gentlewomen? How very economical of His Grace." Mrs. Finch's nostrils flared. "Miss Aldington, mind your tongue." Mr. Harrington, however, seemed unperturbed. The Duke's circumstances require discretion and haste. The arrangement would be temporary, 1 month precisely. After which you would receive a settlement of £5,000 and a swift, quiet annulment. £5,000. Beatrice's heart pounded. It was more money than she would earn in 20 years of teaching. Enough to secure her independence forever. "Why me?" she asked. "Your background is impeccable, daughter of Sir William Aldington, educated at Mrs. Grenville's Seminary for Young Ladies. Your father's disgrace was financial, not moral. And Mrs. Finch assures me of your discretion and intelligence." Beatrice's face burned at the mention of her father. 3 years ago, Sir William had taken his own life when his debts became insurmountable, leaving his daughter with nothing but a tarnished name and the charity of distant relations. And what exactly would this arrangement entail, she asked carefully. You would be presented as the Duke's bride, attend necessary social functions, and reside at Westmoreland House for precisely 1 month. The Duke requires nothing beyond the public appearance of a contented marriage. And after the month, you would be generously compensated, free to establish yourself wherever you wish, perhaps abroad. The annulment would cite non-consummation. Mr. Harrington's expression remained professionally neutral. The Duke is prepared to sign legal documents guaranteeing your settlement. Beatrice looked down at her ink-stained fingers. £5,000. Freedom. An end to the grinding poverty and dependence that had defined her life since her father's death. When would this arrangement begin? Immediately. Tomorrow, if possible. Time is of the essence. May I meet the Duke first? I'm afraid that's not possible. His Grace is exceptionally busy. The first meeting would be at the ceremony itself. Beatrice felt a hysterical laugh building in her throat. To marry a stranger, a duke, no less, sight unseen. It was madness. Complete madness. But so was spending another decade in this prison of a school, growing old and bitter, watching generations of unfortunate girls pass through on their way to equally unfortunate marriages. I'll need the settlement papers in writing, signed before the ceremony. Mr. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course. And I reserve the right to withdraw if the Duke proves unsuitable. Miss Aldington, the Duke of Westmoreland is one of England's premier peers. Even dukes can be monsters, Mr. Harrington. I've taught their daughters. A faint smile touched the solicitor's lips. I can personally vouch for His Grace's character, but your condition is accepted. 2 days later, Beatrice stood in a private chapel, wearing a hastily altered ivory gown, about to marry a man she had never met. When the Duke of Westmoreland finally arrived, Beatrice's carefully maintained composure nearly crumbled. She had expected someone older, perhaps portly and dissipated. Instead, Percy Thornfield was tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp cheekbones and penetrating grey eyes that assessed her with cool detachment. He couldn't be much past 30, his dark hair showing no signs of grey, his bearing military despite his civilian attire. "Miss Aldington," he said, with the barest nod. "Your Grace." The ceremony was brief, clinical. When prompted to kiss his bride, the Duke merely brushed his lips against her cheek, his expression revealing nothing. As they signed the registry, Beatrice noticed his hands, strong, with long fingers, but bearing none of the softness she expected from nobility. These were hands that had known labor of some kind. Curious. "You are not what I expected, Miss Aldington," he murmured as they exited the chapel. "Nor you, Your Grace," she replied. "Though I'm not certain what that signifies." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed." He handed her into his carriage with formal courtesy. "Welcome to your new life, Duchess." Brief though it may be. Percy had not expected guilt. He had expected irritation, perhaps impatience at having to accommodate a stranger in his household. But as he watched Beatrice Aldington, now technically Beatrice Thornfield, Duchess of Westmoreland, take in her new surroundings with careful, observant eyes, he felt an uncomfortable pang of conscience. She was younger than Harrington had led him to believe, perhaps 25, with a quiet dignity that spoke of good breeding despite her reduced circumstances. Her chestnut hair was simply arranged, her gown serviceable rather than fashionable. but there was something in her direct gaze that unsettled him. Intelligence, certainly, but also a wariness that made him wonder what hardships had placed her in a position to accept such an unusual proposal. "Your rooms have been prepared," he said, breaking the silence as they stood in the grand entrance hall of Westmoreland House. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Benton, will show you upstairs. I've arranged for a lady's maid, and a modest allowance for whatever you might require during your stay." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "How generous of you to provide for your wife's needs." Percy felt his jaw tighten. "Our arrangement is unusual, Duchess. I'm attempting to make it as comfortable as possible for both of us." "Of course. Forgive my impertinence." Her tone suggested no true remorse. "When shall society be informed of our joyous union?" "An announcement will appear in tomorrow's Gazette. I've arranged a small dinner party for Friday evening, nothing elaborate, merely close family and a few key social figures whose approval will help cement the legitimacy of our match." "So soon?" "Time is of the essence." He hesitated. "There are certain financial matters that depend upon our marriage being recognized before mid-June." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Ah. So that's the urgency. A clause in a will, perhaps? Or some financial instrument contingent upon your married state?" Percy stared at her, startled by her acuity. "You're rather quick, Duchess." "I've spent 3 years teaching the daughters of the aristocracy, Your Grace. Family finances, or the lack thereof, are frequently discussed in whispers. I've become adept at reading between lines." A bell chimed somewhere in the depths of the house. Percy checked his pocket watch. "I have an appointment I cannot miss. Mrs. Benton will see to your needs. We'll dine at 7 if you'd care to join me." "Is that an invitation or a command, Your Grace?" "Neither. Merely an option." He bowed slightly. "Until this evening, then." As he strode away, Percy was uncomfortably aware of her gaze following him. This temporary duchess might prove more complicated than he had anticipated. Beatrice stood alone in her new bedchamber, a room larger than the entire cottage where she had grown up. The lady's maid, Emma, had helped her change into a simple afternoon dress and then discreetly withdrawn, leaving Beatrice to explore her gilded cage. The adjoining sitting room was elegantly appointed, with windows overlooking a private garden. A writing desk was positioned to capture the best light, stocked with fine stationery bearing the Westmoreland crest. Someone, the Duke himself, had thoughtfully filled a small bookcase with volumes of poetry and novels. She ran her fingers along the spines, pausing at a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. When she opened it, a pressed flower fell out, a forget-me-not, its blue faded to a ghostly grey. The inscription inside read, "To my dearest Percy, on your 16th birthday. May you find a love as enduring as the Darcys. Your loving mother." Beatrice carefully replaced the flower and returned the book to its shelf, feeling as though she had intruded on something deeply personal. Who was this Duke who kept his mother's gift so carefully, yet arranged a marriage of convenience with such clinical detachment? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. An elderly woman entered, her black dress and bunch of keys marking her as the housekeeper. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. "I'm Mrs. Benton. His Grace asked me to ensure you have everything you require." "Thank you, Mrs. Benton. Everything seems quite adequate." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "This must be quite overwhelming for you, Your Grace. A hasty wedding, a new household to manage. I confess it's rather a change from teaching French verbs to reluctant young ladies." Mrs. Benton smiled. "If I may be so bold, Your Grace, the staff are curious about you." His Grace's announcement was rather unexpected. "I imagine it was," Beatrice said carefully. "The Duke and our courtship was brief but intense." "Love at first sight, then?" There was something knowing in Mrs. Benton's eyes that made Beatrice wonder how much the housekeeper had deduced about the true nature of the arrangement. "Something like that," Beatrice murmured. "Tell me, Mrs. Benton, what manner of man is my husband? We've had little time for getting acquainted." The housekeeper's expression grew thoughtful. His Grace is a private gentleman, Your Grace. Reserved, some might say. Since returning from the war. Beatrice interrupted, surprised. Yes, Your Grace. His Grace served in India for several years. Returned only last year when his father passed. The old Duke left things in a terrible state, I'm afraid. Mrs. Benton seemed to realize she'd said too much. But it's not my place to discuss such matters. No, of course not. Thank you, Mrs. Benton. After the housekeeper left, Beatrice stood at the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. A military man. That explained the bearing, the hardened hands. Not merely a pampered aristocrat, then, but a man who had seen combat, who had returned to inherit a title and, apparently, financial troubles that necessitated this strange arrangement. The Duke of Westmoreland was becoming more intriguing by the hour. Dinner that evening was a surprisingly informal affair, served in a small dining room rather than the grand formal one Beatrice had glimpsed during her tour of the house. The Duke rose when she entered, his expression unreadable. Duchess. I hope your accommodations are satisfactory. Quite, Your Grace. Thank you. She took the seat a footman held for her. Your staff has been most attentive. Percy nodded, waiting until the first course was served and the servants had withdrawn before speaking again. We should discuss the practical aspects of our arrangement. Very well. As my wife, temporary though that status may be, you'll be expected to fulfill certain social obligations. The dinner on Friday, as I mentioned. A few charitable committees where the Duchess of Westmoreland traditionally holds patronage. Perhaps a ball or two, though I personally detest such affairs. I'm familiar with social requirements, Your Grace. I was raised in society before my father's difficulties. Percy had the grace to look slightly abashed. Of course. Forgive me. It's easy to forget that circumstances, not birth, led you to teaching. Beatrice sipped her wine. Many find it convenient to forget such distinctions. You have a sharp tongue, Duchess. A necessary weapon when one has little else. A hint of amusement touched his eyes. Indeed. Well, it may serve you well on Friday. Lady Pembroke will be among our guests, a formidable dowager with a talent for vivisecting newcomers to society. I look forward to the challenge. Beatrice set down her glass. May I ask a personal question, Your Grace? You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Mrs. Benton mentioned you served in India. Percy's expression closed. I did. 7 years with the regiment. I returned when my father died. That must have been a significant adjustment. From military life to aristocratic indolence. His smile was bitter. You might be surprised at the similarities. Both involve maintaining appearances, navigating arbitrary hierarchies, and avoiding fatal missteps. You don't seem to enjoy your position. I was a third son, Duchess. Never meant for the title. My eldest brother died of fever in 38. William, the second, was killed at Kabul in 42. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his fingers tightened around his wine glass. I inherited a title I never wanted and an estate collapsing under the weight of my father's mismanagement. Hence our arrangement. He agreed. 1 month of marriage secures the inheritance that will save Westmoreland and the livelihoods of everyone who depends upon it. A small sacrifice. £5,000 is hardly a small sacrifice, Your Grace. No, he acknowledged. But necessary to secure your cooperation and silence. Beatrice felt a flare of indignation. You think I would blackmail you? I think anyone might be tempted, given the right circumstances. His gaze was direct. I prefer to eliminate the temptation. How very practical of you. I am, above all, a practical man, Duchess. Fantasy and romance are luxuries I cannot afford. As the footmen returned to clear their plates, Beatrice found herself studying the Duke's face, the small scar near his right temple, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had once smiled more frequently than he did now. What experiences in India had hardened him? What weight of family obligation had transformed him from the boy who treasured his mother's gift of a romantic novel into this pragmatic man arranging a marriage like a military campaign? "You're staring, Duchess," he said quietly. "Merely trying to know my husband better, Your Grace." She offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Since we have only a month together, I thought I should make the most of it." The morning of the dinner party dawned with unexpected sunshine after days of rain. Beatrice spent hours with the housekeeper, reviewing menus and place settings, learning the complex hierarchy of the Westmoreland household. She had seen little of the Duke since their dinner together. He departed early each morning for appointments in the city and returned late, taking supper alone in his study. Occasionally, she glimpsed him in the library, poring over ledgers with his solicitor, his face drawn with worry. The distance suited her. It gave her time to prepare for her role as Duchess, to study the family portraits, memorize the names of distant relations, and practice moving through the grand rooms as though she belonged there. Emma was arranging her hair when a knock came at the door. The maid answered it and returned with a small leather box. "From His Grace, Your Grace," Emma said, unable to suppress a smile at the awkward phrasing. Inside the box lay a diamond necklace with matching earrings, elegant yet understated. A note in a firm, masculine hand read, "For tonight. These belong to my mother. She would have approved of their use to help save Westmoreland." Beatrice touched the diamonds gently. Not a gift, then, but a loan of the family jewels to enhance her credibility as Duchess. Still, the gesture moved her. When she descended the grand staircase that evening, the Duke waited at the bottom, resplendent in formal evening wear. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in the midnight blue gown she had hastily commissioned, his mother's diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. "You look appropriate, Duchess," he said, offering his arm. "High praise indeed, Your Grace." She placed her hand on his sleeve, noticing how he tensed slightly at her touch. "Shall we face the Inquisition together?" The dinner party was small but significant, 12 guests whose approval would legitimize their hasty marriage in the eyes of society. Lady Pembroke, as promised, was a formidable presence, her lorgnette trained on Beatrice like a weapon. "Such a whirlwind romance," the dowager commented during the soup course. One hadn't heard a whisper of it before the announcement. "Most unusual." "The heart has its own timetable, Lady Pembroke," Beatrice replied smoothly. "When one knows, one knows." "And how exactly did you and Westmoreland become acquainted, my dear? I understood you were employed as a teacher." From the head of the table, Percy tensed visibly. They had prepared a story, of course, but it was thin at best. "We met through my father, actually," Beatrice said, inspiration striking. "Years ago, before his financial troubles. I was just 16, and the Duke was on leave from his regiment. He was kind to an awkward girl at her first ball." She smiled at Percy, infusing her expression with warmth. "When we encountered each other again this spring, at Lady Morrison's literary salon, the connection was immediate." Lady Pembroke's eyebrows rose. "I wasn't aware Westmoreland had literary interests." "My wife has awakened many dormant interests, Lady Pembroke," Percy said, his voice smooth. "Her passion for Wordsworth is quite infectious." Beatrice nearly choked on her wine. She had never mentioned poetry to him, let alone Wordsworth. "Indeed," she managed. "Though His Grace prefers Byron, naturally." "Naturally," Percy agreed, the corner of his mouth twitching. "All that revolutionary fire and martial glory." The conversation moved on, but throughout dinner, Beatrice found herself glancing at the Duke, wondering at the man who could improvise so convincingly, who knew enough about poetry to parry her verbal thrust with one of his own. Later, as the men lingered over port and the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, Lady Pembroke cornered Beatrice by the pianoforte. "You've done well for yourself," the dowager said bluntly. "From ruined gentlewoman to Duchess in one leap." "I married for love, Lady Pembroke, not advancement." The lie came easily to Beatrice's lips. "Did you, indeed?" The older woman's gaze was shrewd. Then you're even more fortunate. Westmoreland is a good man, better than most of his station. He deserves happiness after all he's endured. Before Beatrice could inquire further, the men joined them, and Percy was at her side, his hand lightly touching the small of her back in a gesture that appeared intimate but maintained a careful distance. "My wife has promised to play for us," he announced, guiding her toward the instrument. "I've promised no such thing," Beatrice whispered. "Indulge me," he murmured back. Lady Pembroke was looking entirely too inquisitive. Beatrice sat at the pianoforte, silently cursing the Duke as she sorted through the sheet music. She selected a simple Schubert piece and began to play, her fingers remembering the lessons of her youth despite years without practice. To her surprise, Percy remained beside her, turning pages with unexpected attentiveness. When she finished, their guests applauded politely. "You didn't tell me you played," he said quietly. "You didn't ask." She met his gaze. "There's a great deal we don't know about each other, Your Grace." "Percy," he corrected, aware of watching eyes. "A wife should use her husband's given name, at least in company." "Percy," she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. For a moment, something unreadable flickered in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. Then it was gone, and he was turning to respond to a question from Lord Hampton, the moment broken. Later, after the guests had departed with apparent approval of the match, Beatrice found herself alone with the Duke in the drawing room. She removed the diamond earrings, placing them carefully in their box. "You played beautifully," Percy said, pouring himself a brandy. "Another hidden talent. Merely adequate training. Any girl of good family learns music, whether she has talent or not." She touched the necklace. "Thank you for the loan of these. They're exquisite. Keep them for the duration of our arrangement. You'll need to appear as my Duchess at several more functions." "As you wish." She hesitated. "The evening went well, I think." Lady Pembroke seemed convinced. "Yes. Your improvisation about our meeting was inspired." He sipped his brandy. "Though I've never attended a literary salon in my life." "Nor I." It seemed suitably intellectual yet acceptably social. A faint smile touched his lips. "We make a good team, it seems." "For a temporary alliance, yes." Something in her tone made him look at her sharply. "Having second thoughts, Duchess?" "No." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "But I wonder if you are." Lady Pembroke said something curious, that you deserve happiness after all you've endured. What did she mean? The Duke's expression closed. Lady Pembroke speaks too freely. "My military service was difficult, as all service is." It seemed more specific than that. Percy set down his glass with deliberate care. "My private history is not part of our arrangement, Duchess." "Beatrice," she corrected, mimicking his earlier tone. "A husband should use his wife's given name, at least in private." For a moment, she thought he might smile. Instead, he merely inclined his head. "Good night, Beatrice. You performed admirably this evening." "Good night, Percy." As she climbed the stairs to her chamber, Beatrice found herself thinking of the scar at his temple, the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes, and wondering what secrets the Duke of Westmoreland kept locked as carefully as his mother's diamonds. The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. By day, Beatrice attended to the duties of a duchess, reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Benton, receiving callers, and accompanying Percy to carefully selected social functions where their marriage could be displayed to maximum advantage. By night, she dined with the Duke, their conversations gradually evolving from stiff formality to something approaching comfortable companionship. Percy, she discovered, possessed a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed. He was well-read despite his protests to the contrary, and surprisingly knowledgeable about topics ranging from Indian architecture to botanical classification. Increasingly, Beatrice found herself lingering over dinner, reluctant to end their conversations. More disconcertingly, she found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he read, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. It was dangerous, this growing fascination with a man who had made the temporary nature of their relationship abundantly clear. In just over 2 weeks, the month would end, her role as Duchess would conclude, and she would depart Westmoreland House forever. The thought brought an unexpected pang. One afternoon, exploring the house while Percy was engaged with his solicitor, Beatrice discovered a small, locked room adjacent to the library. Curiosity piqued, she asked Mrs. Benton about it. "That's His Grace's map room," the housekeeper explained. "From his military days. He spends hours there sometimes, though less since you arrived." Later, when Percy returned from his appointments, Beatrice mentioned her discovery. "Mrs. Benton tells me you have a map room. Are you a cartography enthusiast?" Something guarded entered his expression. "Not exactly. It's a private space." "Of course. I didn't mean to pry." He studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Would you like to see it?" Surprised by the offer, Beatrice nodded. "I would, yes." Percy led her to the locked room, producing a key from his waistcoat pocket. Inside, Beatrice found not the expected collection of maps, but a workshop. A large drafting table dominated the center, strewn with technical drawings. The walls held detailed sketches of bridges, aqueducts, and strange mechanical devices she couldn't identify. "You're an engineer," she breathed, understanding dawning. "Amateur only." Percy ran his hand over one of the drawings, a complex bridge design. "In India, I worked with the Corps of Engineers. Discovered I had some aptitude for it. These are remarkable." Beatrice examined a detailed drawing of what appeared to be an improved irrigation system. "Have any been built?" "A few. In Punjab." He touched a smaller sketch. "This water filtration system was implemented in 3 villages before I left." There was pride in his voice, and something else, a passion she hadn't heard before. This was the real Percy Thornfield, she realized. Not the dutiful Duke, but the engineer who found purpose in creation. "Why keep it secret? This is impressive work." Percy's expression tightened. "A duke builds collections, Beatrice, not bridges. My father made that abundantly clear when I expressed interest in engineering as a youth. It's why he purchased my commission, to redirect my unsuitable enthusiasm toward more appropriate martial pursuits. But you're the Duke now. Surely you can pursue your interests as you wish. Perhaps, if I manage to save the estate." He gestured around the room. "For now, this remains my private indulgence." Beatrice moved closer to the drafting table, examining a half-completed drawing. "What's this one?" "A design for improved tenant housing on the northern estates. More efficient heating, better sanitation." Percy's voice warmed as he explained the technical details, his entire demeanor changing as he spoke of load-bearing walls and ventilation systems. Beatrice found herself smiling at his enthusiasm. "You care deeply about this. Engineering has practical applications. It improves lives in tangible ways." He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Does that seem terribly bourgeois to you?" "On the contrary," she said softly. "It seems admirable. Far more useful than collecting art or racing horses, as most of your peers do." For a moment, they stood close together in the gentle afternoon light, and Beatrice was acutely aware of him, the faint scent of sandalwood, the warmth radiating from his tall frame, the intensity in his grey eyes as they held her gaze. Then he stepped back, the moment broken. "We should prepare for dinner. Lady Harrington's ball is this evening." "Of course." Beatrice moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you, Percy, for sharing this with me." He nodded, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. In that moment, Beatrice realized with a jolt of alarm that she was in grave danger of developing genuine feelings for her temporary husband, feelings that could only lead to heartbreak when their arrangement concluded. Lady Harrington's ball was the social event of the season, a glittering affair attended by the cream of society. As Beatrice entered on Percy's arm, she felt the weight of curious stares. Their marriage remained a topic of speculation despite their careful public performances. "Remember, 3 dances only," Percy murmured as they moved through the crowd. "One with me to open, one with Lord Pembroke as a courtesy to his mother, and one with whomever else approaches that doesn't seem a complete scoundrel." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Are you concerned for my virtue, Your Grace?" "I'm concerned for your reputation," he corrected. "Which, for the next fortnight at least, reflects upon mine." The reminder of their arrangement's impending conclusion stung more than it should have. "Of course. I shall comport myself with appropriate ducal dignity." Their opening waltz passed in tense silence, Percy guiding her with practiced ease but maintaining a proper distance between them. As the music ended, Beatrice couldn't help but compare his formal manner now with the animated engineer who had shown her his designs that afternoon. "You're frowning," he noted as he escorted her from the dance floor. "Am I? Perhaps I'm simply concentrating on projecting appropriate duchessly serenity." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "You're many admirable things, Beatrice, but serenity has never been among them." Before she could respond to this unexpected compliment, they were interrupted by a striking blonde woman in a daring crimson gown. "Percy, darling," the woman purred, placing a familiar hand on his arm. "How delightful to see you. It's been an age." Percy's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Lady Montrose. May I present my wife, the Duchess of Westmoreland." Lady Montrose's perfect eyebrows arched. "So it's true, then. The confirmed bachelor has finally been captured." She assessed Beatrice with a dismissive glance. "How unexpected." "Love often is," Beatrice replied smoothly, taking Percy's arm possessively. "Wouldn't you agree, Lady Montrose?" The blonde smile turned brittle. "Indeed. Though I've always found that love requires a nurturing. I do hope you're giving your husband adequate attention, Duchess. Percy has such specific needs." The implication was unmistakable. Beatrice felt Percy tense beside her. "Lady Montrose," he said, his voice cold, "I believe your husband is looking for you." "Is he?" "Poor Charles is always looking for something." She trailed her fingers down Percy's sleeve. "If you find yourself reminiscing about old times, you know where to find me." After she sauntered away, Beatrice maintained her smile with effort. "An old friend." "A mistake," Percy said tersely. "One of many I made after returning from India." "I see." Beatrice felt an irrational stab of jealousy. "She's very beautiful. And very married, despite her behavior suggesting otherwise." Percy's jaw tightened. "I apologize for her impropriety." "No need. I'm well aware that most men of your station maintain companions, even after marriage." Percy looked at her sharply. "Is that what you think of me?" "I hardly know you well enough to form an opinion of your personal habits, Your Grace. After weeks as my wife, I should hope you know me better than that." His voice was low, taut with suppressed emotion. "Whatever else I may be, I am not a man who breaks vows, even temporary ones." Before Beatrice could respond, Lord Pembroke approached to claim his dance, and Percy withdrew with a curt bow. As Beatrice was led to the dance floor, she caught sight of him moving purposefully through the crowd, away from the ballroom. Later, after dancing with Lord Pembroke and declining several other invitations, Beatrice searched for Percy without success. Eventually, she found herself on a quiet terrace, seeking a moment's respite from the heated ballroom. "He's in the card room," came a female voice behind her. "If you're looking for your husband." Beatrice turned to find Lady Montrose, a glass of champagne in her hand. "I wasn't, actually," Beatrice lied. "Simply enjoying the night air." Lady Montrose laughed, a brittle sound. "Come now, Duchess, let's not pretend. We both know what this marriage of yours truly is." Beatrice's heart stuttered. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning." "A marriage of convenience." Lady Montrose sipped her champagne. "Percy needs the Ashington inheritance to save Westmoreland. You need, well, whatever he offered you." "Money?" I presume? Security. You're mistaken, Beatrice said, her voice steadier than she felt. The Duke and I married for love. Did you? How very touching. Lady Montrose's smile was pitying. Percy doesn't love, Duchess. Not since India. Not since what happened there. What did happen? The question escaped before Beatrice could stop it. Lady Montrose's eyes gleamed with triumph at having piqued her interest. He hasn't told you? About Madeline. Madeline. His fiancée. She followed him to India, against his wishes. Died of cholera a week after arriving in Calcutta. Lady Montrose examined her perfectly manicured nails. Percy was never the same after that. Blamed himself, naturally. Threw himself into increasingly dangerous missions. When he returned to England, he was changed. Harder. Colder. She looked up, her gaze calculating. He'll never love again, Duchess. Whatever arrangement you have, don't mistake it for more. Before Beatrice could respond, the terrace door opened, and Percy himself appeared. His expression darkened when he saw Lady Montrose. Beatrice, he said, his voice tight. I've been looking for you. Our carriage is waiting. Percy, darling, Lady Montrose said silkily. I was just getting acquainted with your charming bride. How unfortunate for her. He offered Beatrice his arm. Shall we, Duchess? In the carriage, Percy sat rigidly, staring out the window at the passing streets. The silence between them stretched, taut with unspoken questions. Finally, Beatrice could bear it no longer. Is it true? About Madeline. Percy's head snapped toward her. What did she tell you? That you were engaged. That she died in India. That you changed afterward. For a long moment, Percy was silent, his face half in shadow. Then, he sighed, a sound of deep weariness. Yes. It's true. I'm sorry. Beatrice hesitated. Lady Montrose also suggested our marriage was one of convenience. For the Ashington inheritance. Percy's laugh held no humor. Victoria Montrose has always had a talent for malice disguised as concern. He looked directly at Beatrice. Did you contradict her? Of course. Good. He turned back to the window. We have less than 2 weeks remaining in our arrangement. We cannot afford suspicion now. His words were like a physical blow, reminding Beatrice of the reality she had begun to forget, that their marriage was a business transaction, nothing more. That soon she would leave Westmoreland House with her settlement, and Percy would continue his life without her. As they arrived home in silence, Beatrice wondered when the thought of leaving had become so painful. The following week passed in strained politeness. Percy spent long hours away from the house, returning late and taking meals in his study. Beatrice occupied herself with household matters and preparations for a charity musicale the Duchess traditionally hosted each summer. One evening, unable to sleep, she wandered to the library in search of a book. To her surprise, Percy was there, seated in a leather chair by the fire, a glass of brandy untouched beside him. He looked up when she entered, his expression guarded. Beatrice. I thought you'd retired. I couldn't sleep. She hesitated in the doorway. I'll leave you to your solitude. No, stay. The word seemed to surprise him as much as her. Please. Beatrice entered, selecting a volume of poetry from a nearby shelf before sitting in the chair opposite his. For a while, they simply existed in the same space, the crackling fire the only sound. I was engaged to Madeline Harwick for 3 years, Percy said suddenly, his voice low. We grew up together. Our families expected the match. It was comfortable, if not passionate. Beatrice set down her book, listening. When I was posted to India, she wanted to accompany me. I refused, the conditions were harsh, disease rampant. But after 6 months, she followed anyway. His fingers tightened around the brandy glass. I received word of her arrival the same day I was informed of her death. Cholera. She suffered terribly, alone among strangers. That wasn't your fault, Beatrice said softly. Wasn't it? I knew the risks better than she did. I should have been more persuasive, or arranged a proper escort to return her to England when she arrived. Percy's face was haunted in the firelight. Instead, I was 200 miles away, leading a surveying expedition in the Highlands. You couldn't have known. Perhaps not. But afterward. He took a swallow of brandy. I volunteered for increasingly hazardous assignments. Pushed myself beyond reasonable limits. Some called it bravery. It was closer to penance. And then your brothers died, and you inherited. Yes. The final irony, surviving all those risks only to be trapped in this gilded cage. Percy looked around the grand library. Now you understand why I find myself in this predicament. I never learned to be a proper duke. Never wanted to be one. What did you want to be? Beatrice asked, though she thought she knew the answer. A faint smile touched his lips. An engineer. Builder of bridges and systems that endure. Instead, I've become a destroyer of my family's fortune, nearly of Westmoreland itself. That's not true. Beatrice leaned forward, driven by an impulse she couldn't suppress. You're saving Westmoreland. The inheritance, the improvements you're designing for the tenant farms, you're rebuilding, not destroying. Percy studied her face, something vulnerable in his gaze. You have a generous view of my character, Beatrice. I have an accurate view, she corrected. Based on observation rather than rumor or self-recrimination. For a long moment, they held each other's gaze across the space between their chairs. Then Percy set down his glass and stood. It's late. We should both retire. At the door, he paused, looking back at her. Thank you. For listening. Thank you for trusting me with your story. After he left, Beatrice remained by the fire, her book forgotten in her lap. She was falling in love with Percy Thornfield, not the Duke of Westmoreland, but the man beneath the title. The engineer with dreams of building, the soldier haunted by loss, the reluctant aristocrat trying to save his heritage not for himself but for those who depended on him. It was a realization both wonderful and terrible. In just over a week, their arrangement would end. Percy would receive his inheritance, saving Westmoreland. She would receive her settlement and depart. And her heart, it seemed, would remain behind, left with a man who had made it clear he had no room for love in his life. The night of the charity musicale arrived, marking the final social event of their arrangement. In just 3 days, the required month of marriage would conclude, the Ashington trustees would release the inheritance, and Beatrice's role as Duchess would end. She dressed with particular care, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that Emma assured her was most flattering. Percy's mother's diamonds adorned her throat and ears for the last time. When she descended the stairs, Percy waited below, magnificent in formal evening wear. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. You look beautiful, he said, the words seeming to escape without his volition. Thank you. Beatrice fought to keep her voice steady. You're most handsome yourself, Your Grace. Percy, he corrected softly. We're still married, after all. The musicale passed in a blur of performances and polite conversation. Beatrice played her role perfectly, the accomplished Duchess hosting society's elite. If she sometimes caught Percy watching her with an unreadable expression, she tried not to assign it meaning. It was nearly midnight when the last guests departed. Beatrice stood in the emptying music room, a strange melancholy settling over her. This had been her final performance. In 3 days, she would return to being Miss Aldington, former governess, a woman of no particular importance. You were magnificent tonight, Percy said from behind her. Everyone was charmed. Beatrice turned to face him. High praise from a man who detests social gatherings. This one was tolerable. A faint smile touched his lips. Largely due to your efforts. I'm glad I could be of service. Beatrice removed the diamond earrings. I should return these to you. The performance is nearly over. Percy's expression changed, something like pain flickering in his eyes. Keep them. Consider them part of your settlement. I couldn't possibly, please. He stepped closer, his voice low. I want you to have them. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotion. Beatrice was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from him, of the intensity in his gaze as it held hers. Percy, she began, uncertain what she meant to say. Before she could continue, the drawing-room door opened, and Mrs. Benton appeared. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, the housekeeper said. But Mr. Harrington has arrived. He says it's most urgent. Percy's brow furrowed. At this hour? Show him to my study. As he moved to follow Mrs. Benton, he paused, looking back at Beatrice. We'll continue our conversation tomorrow. Alone in the drawing-room, Beatrice touched the diamonds at her throat, wondering what Percy had been about to say, what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. Tomorrow, she thought. They would continue tomorrow. But the next morning, Percy was gone. His Grace departed at dawn, Mrs. Benton informed her. A matter of urgent business, he said. He left this for you. The housekeeper handed Beatrice a sealed note. Inside, Percy's firm handwriting conveyed only the briefest message: unexpected complication with the Ashington Trust. Have gone to Yorkshire to resolve the matter. Will return by the 15th. The 15th, the final day of their arrangement. Beatrice felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Percy had left without saying goodbye, without finishing their conversation. Perhaps it was for the best, a clean break before the inevitable separation. But as the days passed without word, Beatrice found herself increasingly anxious. What complication had arisen? Would it jeopardize the inheritance? And more selfishly, would Percy return in time for them to have a proper farewell? On the morning of the 15th, Beatrice began packing her belongings, the few she had brought and the new wardrobe Percy had commissioned for her as Duchess. She left out a simple travelling dress for the following day, when she would depart Westmoreland House forever. The diamonds she placed in their box with reverent care. Despite Percy's insistence, she couldn't keep them. They were family heirlooms, meant for a true Duchess of Westmoreland, not a temporary occupant of the title. As evening approached with no sign of Percy, Beatrice found herself in the map room, studying his drawings in the fading light. Here was the essence of the man she had come to love, his vision, his intelligence, his desire to build rather than merely possess. The sound of the door opening startled her. She turned to find Percy standing there, travel-worn and weary, his cravat loosened, his hair dishevelled by the wind. You're here, she said, embarrassed by the naked relief in her voice. I promised I would return by the 15th. He stepped into the room, his gaze intense. I see you found my sanctuary again. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to remember. Percy moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. The trust complication has been resolved. The trustees are satisfied with our marriage. The inheritance will be released tomorrow morning. I'm glad, Beatrice said sincerely. Westmoreland will be saved. Yes. Percy hesitated, something uncertain in his expression. I've prepared the annulment papers, as agreed. And your settlement. You'll be free to leave tomorrow. Thank you. Beatrice fought to keep her voice steady. I've left your mother's diamonds in my room. I couldn't take them, despite your generosity. Percy's jaw tightened. As you wish. A heavy silence fell between them, filled with all the things Beatrice longed to say but dared not. That this month had changed her. That she had come to care for him deeply. That the thought of leaving him was like a physical pain. If there's nothing else, she finally said, I should finish packing. As she moved to pass him, Percy caught her arm, his touch gentle but firm. Beatrice, wait. She looked up at him, her heart hammering. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low and intent. About our arrangement. About the terms we agreed upon. Yes? I'm wondering if you might consider an extension. Beatrice's breath caught. An extension? Yes. Percy's hand slid down her arm to take her hand. A more permanent one, in fact. I don't understand. Percy took a deep breath, as though gathering courage. These weeks with you, they've changed me. Changed how I see my life, my future. I never expected to feel this way again, to want someone's companionship, their perspective, their presence. Beatrice stared at him, hardly daring to hope. What are you saying, Percy? I'm saying, quite badly, that I don't want you to leave. His eyes held hers, vulnerable and earnest. I'm asking if you might consider staying. Not as part of our arrangement, but as my wife. My true wife. Because you need a duchess, Beatrice whispered, needing to be certain. No. Percy raised his free hand to cup her cheek. Because I need you, Beatrice. Your sharp mind, your courage, your willingness to see me as I am, not as my title demands. Percy, I know I'm not what you envisioned for yourself, he continued, words tumbling out as though he feared she would stop him. A reluctant duke with unconventional interests and a damaged heart. But if you could find it in yourself to stay, to build something real with me. He paused, swallowing hard. I think we could be happy together. I think we could build something that endures, like the bridges I design. Tears blurred Beatrice's vision. I never expected this, she managed. When I agreed to our arrangement, I never thought. Nor did I. Percy's thumb brushed her cheek. I needed a bride for a month. I never expected to need her forever. Beatrice laughed through her tears. You impossible man. Do you know how long I've been falling in love with you? Percy's expression transformed, hope blazing in his eyes. Have you, truly? Yes. She stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest. I've loved you since you showed me this room, since I saw the man behind the Duke. Perhaps even before that. Percy pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce and tender. I love you, Beatrice. Stay with me. Be my duchess, my partner, my love. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes to all of it. Their first true kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with the release of weeks of suppressed longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Percy rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured, that I have plans to redesign the East Wing. Terrible drafts in winter. Beatrice laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. As your duchess, I insist on reviewing the plans. I have strong opinions about proper ventilation. I wouldn't have it any other way. Percy smiled, the expression transforming his face, erasing years of solitude and regret. We'll build Westmoreland's future together. Together, Beatrice agreed, lifting her face for another kiss. The temporary arrangement had ended, but something far more precious and permanent had just begun.